Um, we talked a little bit about, you were talking to me like a community organizer. You know, what do we do with this information and all these learnings going forward, not just in terms of what's ahead for project exploration, but what's ahead for this field and how we can build on it.
So I think I ought to probably just take a minute to say what's ahead for project exploration that we know about with some hope and some certainty. I think the first thing is that we're going to work to double the number of students we're serving. And so to go from 250 to 500 or 600 is no small challenge when you think about the things that we found that really matter. How do you maintain personalized experiences? How do you develop individualized support for students? And specifically, how do you make learning opportunities more transparent? This is something that really came through in the research with the team from REA, was students felt that there was some randomness. They weren't always sure what was available in terms of what was next. It was clear to us on staff, but wasn't clear to them. So in terms of the student piece, the next thing for us is to build out what we're calling our science pathways. It's really a spectrum of programs that has a strand of discovery level programs where students who maybe don't know they're interested in science have a chance to get into science, explore that. There's a lot of youth development. As they decide they are curious about things, there's a set of explore programs where they can get into something in depth. And then for those students who decide they actually want to pursue science, I think this is an area that we really need to build on through partnerships. How do we equip students to be able to get into college and be successful in college? For first generation college bound students, that's not a given. And so again, the partnerships with the city colleges, with Northeastern, other programs, that's going to be a real important thing. So serving more students with more kinds of programs, working with scientists. The second thing is figuring out how do we take what we've learned and turn that into tools that that are accessible by other organizations. So we're developing a scientist development training program. So scientists who want to do outreach in our programs, we can think about consistency in our model, but also equip them to do outreach in other kinds of programs. That's an example of what we're thinking through when we think about making our model accessible. I think the last thing is we're really envisioning a kind of youth science center that would be a kind of hub. You know, when Caitlin's program is up and running, when Project Sincere and many of the other folks who have programs in this room need a place to be where we can convene, where students have a place of their own, where scientists can come to the fore in those relationships. That's going to be a real game changer, not just for us, but for the landscape of what is seen, known, and available, we think, in the life of the city.
Because most of your programming is fairly decentralized, then, right? You don't have a place to go. The places are out in the mountains and some of the other places that Caitlin visited, right?
We don't drag everybody to Montana against their will, but we're nomads. We are programmatic nomads. There are benefits to that, to be in the Garfield Park Conservatory, to be on campus at the University of Chicago. There are absolutely benefits to the young people and to us, but ultimately you want students' work to be displayed. It's a way of validating it, it's a way of documenting it, and fundamentally it's a way of making something public. And I think that's a big part of the trick in an opportunity ahead. And so we do want a roof over our programs, but most of all we want a place where students can come and families can come and feel it's theirs.
Caitlin, I'm going to put you on the spot, and I know you're a huge fan of project exploration. It was a wonderful experience for you, but what would you have liked to have gotten or experienced that you didn't get a chance to for whatever reasons? Or, I mean, and the program is certainly evolved over time, and you're still in touch with it. But what's the missing links or things that you'd love to see if they had all the money in the world that you think would benefit a student?
Well, definitely they need all the money in the world so that we can, you know, have more opportunities for students, like the experience I had and many other students. Like Michael, he's sitting here, and I know he had a wonderful experience too. But let me see if I could think of something that I would like to see the program improve on. I guess just having more of a centralized institution where students can display their work and just be more centralized, because we are all over the place. And I mean, there were benefits for me because I wasn't very familiar with the city. I wasn't familiar with you know, places outside of the state, and so that was a benefit for me. But I think it would be a good idea to have a more centralized place for students to come and, talk to each other about what they're doing, and kind of just always keep in contact. I mean, students come into the office all the time and, keep in contact that way. And there's always meetings going on, different events to bring students back and get involved with science. So there's always opportunity to do that. But it would be better to have it centralized in an institution.
And could you just talk a little bit about what the community environment was like when you first came to Project Exploration? Were there, you heard about this from your mother and you resisted. Were there programs, other after school or outside of school programs that you'd heard about, that your peers were going to? What were the opportunities like for you then?
Well, at first, I wasn't too involved with any out-of-school opportunities, which is why I was so reluctant in the beginning about the program, because it was something new.
What were you doing with your time out of school?
Well, let me see. I was at North Kenwood at the time, and so I was involved with some after-school programs like cheerleading. I mentioned I was a girly girl, so I was into cheerleading and that type of thing, but nothing to push me to be a leader. I love to write, and so a lot of the teachers at North Kenwood Oakland Charter School, they mentored me in writing and things, and just pushed me to look at different opportunities like Project Exploration. And so that's what kind of gave me the jump start to be a leader and get more involved in leadership opportunities. But other than that, I really wasn't involved in any out-of-school opportunities.
So that was it. But when you found PE, you were in love.
Yeah, I was in love, and I stuck with it.
And June, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the collaboration process and how that worked within PE and why that is important. What does that do that's different, do you think, if you think there is something that's different about it?
Well, with most of the evaluations that I work on, I do encourage that we work very closely with the program, because the ultimate goal is that what the product is, the report or the findings, are useful. And so if we don't have a strong understanding of what is going to be useful for the program, then what happens is they're having expectations on one wavelength, and we're operating and conducting research on another wavelength, and then you get to the end and go, well, that's not what we thought we were going to get. And so we definitely want to prevent that. And so it's very important in all the projects I work on that we develop a very participatory approach and collaborate. And sometimes it's limited on how much the program really wants to collaborate versus some level of participation at the minimum of approving certain approaches or instruments. But Gabe and her staff were very interested in collaborating and being aware, and like Caitlin mentioned, just being able to learn from that process, because another objective that we always try to encourage is building a capacity for evaluation within programs so that they don't necessarily have to seek external support to understand how they've developed over time. They can build systems within their program as they are improving and as they grow, so that they can be tracking and monitoring and doing a certain level of internal evaluation along the way, which is very helpful for certain points in time when they do want to seek external evaluators, because they already have that sort of self-awareness and improvement and can demonstrate how they have been attentive to that. So they were doing that to a certain extent, but I think through this process that some of that awareness that they could be improving in that way came out. But it was very important to us, because we did conduct the study in about 7 months, so it was a pretty short timeline. And so again, very important to have that collaboration piece so we could ensure that we were on target with what they were going to find to be useful for them.
And have you done, I'm sure, studies like this before with other organizations? If you had a bunch of money thrown at you right now, how could you use that to benefit? What kind of additional research would you recommend for PE? Or is this a time to stop doing the research for a while and build on that? Or are there other things that they could learn right now that would be beneficial?
For PE specifically, I think moving in the direction of doing a more formal longitudinal study would be appropriate, because we had to basically do this retrospective, and that was appropriate for what they wanted to know. But what we found through their database that they had just implemented, really moving from tracking using sort of spreadsheets and other paper-based modes to using a online centralized database where, sort of thinking about, well, how do our intake forms and all of these things fit into this? And so we had some of what we were hoping that we could reconstruct what had happened over the 10 years, but again, there were gaps. And so I think that the more they develop that, like some of the, what Sarah mentioned, that then they could really do some tracking and to do a longitudinal study, because I think really being able to understand the effect and impacts versus the influence, which is really what we were only, really what I'm most comfortable with, the validity to say that they strongly influence these students and participants in their programs. However, to really be able to say the effect and impact and to what extent, I think we would need more full data set, and also more time too. Is it just the more time you have tracking students and their achievements, then you are able to make with more confidence assertions of impact and effectiveness.
Sarah, is there anything you want to pick up on that you've heard? I have a question for you, but is there anything you wanted to add to this discussion?
I agree with that. And I think part of this is helping Project Exploration both to think about the students that are within the program and learning more about them. So we need to have a better understanding of what their background is, how are they like or different from other students in their school, and be able to trace them longitudinally over time to really have a better understanding both of who these students are and what their outcomes are. And then I think the second piece is a question of outcomes. And this is when I was touching on the social capital and resiliency piece. What it's getting at is, I think that Project Exploration, yes, we want to influence graduation rates, and yes, we want to influence things like more students going to college, but I think there are some kind of intermediate outcomes that we should be considering, because the program is building things like self-efficacy and confidence and connectedness between students and adults who are scientists. And so we should start thinking about identifying and measuring some of those intermediate outcomes, which really requires us to collect information and data in a systematic and ongoing way through surveys of students, both before they come into the program, while they're in the program, after they leave the program. So I think it's a combination of building these databases that help us to understand better who these students are and what their trajectories are, and then also thinking about what kind of outcomes we can use to measure whether or not Project Exploration is having an impact.